The city of Maheto, Kreris Prefecture, Taldor, mid-autumn 4718. After Eutropia's victory at the Battle of Maheto Fields, the Grand Duke of the Kreris Prefecture, Grand Duke Barand Heskelar, had decided to open the doors of his city to her and her army. He had apologized profusely for not recognizing her rightful claim earlier, but she had shown her quality to him, and he was ready to bend the knee. It was no longer appropriate for Rankle to play the part of Eutropia. In fact, no sooner had they won the battle, and Aurelius had cast 2 separate teleportation spells in order to bring Eutropia herself to the camp so that she might celebrate with her soldiers. After being admitted into the city, Heskelar was wise enough to push his city's resources to near the point of breaking in order to provide an appropriate feast for the conquering army. That night in Maheto was for feasting, celebrating, and in pockets for the mourning of the dead. The next day, Eutropia herself would hold council, debrief with all of her allies, and resolve any matters that needed discussion in the aftermath of their final victory. Although vengeance was ever on Aurelius's mind, Eutropia insisted the heroes remain with her in Maheto for at least a day, before they tried to track down Pytherius and Zemar. The following day, the morning sun rose over Maheto, its golden light filtering over the jagged peaks of the World's Edge Mountains. Built into the natural rise of the land, the city cascaded in tiers, its architecture a blend of old Taldan grandeur and the rugged practicality of the dwarves of Crevenkus. High stone walls bristled with battlements, and towers crowned by crenellations kept watch over the surrounding plains. At the heart of the city stood the Grand Duke's citadel, its imposing spire visible from every corner. Here Eutropia would hold court. Below it sprawled a maze of cobbled streets, arched bridges, and tightly packed buildings with red-tiled roofs. In the wake of last night's revelries, the city stirred slowly. Soldiers, weary from both battle and celebration, shuffled through the streets, some seeking food, others the solace of a temple or the companionship of comrades. Within an expansive inn, which had been emptied expressly for the army's leaders, not far from the city's main square, Aurelius, Marius, Diyanah, and Rankle stirred. Demi, as always, had remained up, keeping a vigilant eye for any tricks Pytherius might still have in store for them. There had been no trouble in the night. Aurelius awoke early, his hair disheveled, but his mind already at work. The young wizard sat by the window, his spellbook open, studying the arcane sigils found therein. He muttered about Zemar under his breath, his pen scratching furiously against the page. Marius, ever the early riser despite the previous night's indulgence, was already tending to his gear. Coriana's exposed punch-dagger blade gleamed, freshly cleaned, and his shield stood propped against the wall. He glanced over at Diyanah, who was still sprawled across his cot, one arm draped protectively over his lion Raja, whose ears flicked lazily in the morning light. Rankle sat cross-legged on the floor, absently shuffling a deck of cards. The Cavern elf seemed unaffected by the feast's successes, his expression as inscrutable as ever. The city's bells rang out, a low, steady toll that called its citizens to action. Today Eutropia would hold her council, and decisions would be made. Even though they were there quite early, by the time the companions arrived, the great hall of Grand Duke Heskelar's palace was a cacophony of voices, the hum of conversation interwoven with the shuffle of boots on polished stone. The chamber was grand yet unpretentious, built by dwarven masons. Massive stone pillars, carved with scenes of Taldor's storied past, rose to vaulted ceilings, while banners from the prefecture's history hung in muted splendor. A wide dais had been erected at the far end of the hall, flanked by torch-bearing sconces that cast flickering lights across the room. At the center sat Grand Princess Eutropia Stavian, her presence commanding, even in the midst of the throng. Lords, knights, and captains crowded the hall, their faces a mix of pride and exhaustion. The noble banners of their houses mingled with the crests of lesser commanders, creating a kaleidoscope of color in the otherwise austere space. The din softened as Eutropia raised her hand, the gesture silencing the crowd with an authority that needed no amplification. Her voice, clear and steady, carried over the assembly. Gathered heroes, yesterday we stood united on the fields of Maheto. Together we turned back tyranny, proving not only the strength of our arms, but the righteousness of our cause. Her words drew murmurs of approval, and a few bold captains shouted their assent. Towards the front of the hall, Duchess Martella Lothede, who had mostly recovered from the dragonfire burns thanks to the hard work of the clerics, sat with the 5 companions. Each of them sat in a row of high-backed chairs, their positions deliberately set to honor their special contributions. One chair had curiously been left empty beside them. Behind the dais itself stood Grand Duke Barand Heskelar and his dwarven wife. They had a demeanour of contrition, and yet also of resolve, as a lord and lady who had seen the tide of war shift, and hoping that by hosting this event, their decision to not emerge from their high walls during the battle and support the princess more directly might be overlooked. To their right, heralds and scribes stood ready, recording every word, ensuring the proceedings would echo across Taldor. As Eutropia spoke next, her eyes turned towards the companions. First and foremost, I cannot continue without first addressing the immense contributions that the champions of Marat County had to my campaign. Baron Aurelius Betinos of the Stakis Barony and his 4 companions, Diyanah, Demi, Marius and Willem. They helped secure the Tandak prefecture for the loyalist cause. They travelled to Yanmas and warned Grand Duke Broyce Renjana, she indicated the Grand Duke, also sat in a position of high honour across the hall, of Pytherius's treachery, and ensured his forces were here to help win the day today. Once Pytherius's soldiers began to march across the northern plains, they proved so efficacious in their leadership that I named one among their company, Lord Diyanah of House Frascati, to be my Grand Strategos. This is a decision I'm very proud of, for it was his strong leadership that led us to victory on this day. Diyanah looked awkwardly to Rankle, feeling somewhat guilty that he was getting the credit here when it was due to him, but he simply did as he felt he should and stood up and bowed before the audience chamber. Even as Grand Strategos Frascati organized our response, Baron Aurelius journeyed with the rest of his company to the eternal city of Axis to seek a non-violent resolution to our succession crisis. This may be hard to believe, but they conferred with none other than First Emperor Taldaris. Aurelius himself has been named the custodian of the Mantle of Kings by Taldaris. Aurelius, she commanded, would you be so kind as to explain to our assemblage what the mantle is? Aurelius flushed slightly, not realizing he would be called upon to speak. He stood up stiffly. It's a relic of old Taldor, enchanted by Aradin himself, intended for use in case of a succession crisis. It carries in it a sliver of Taldaris' own soul. With it, the custodian may place the mantle upon the shoulders of a potential successor to the Lion Throne, and determine the worthiness of the candidate for the position. Eutropia smiled at him. He had done great. Might the custodian perform this ceremony for the assemblage? Aurelius nervously took off the Mantle of Kings and stepped forward. 2 days ago the Ulfen Guard verified this. Yesterday, Ottar Vinmark accepted my claim and welcomed me into the palace. The Primogen crown has been stolen, likely by Pytherius after my father was killed. But if it hadn't, I would have been crowned then and there. Pytherius knew this, and he launched his illegitimate assault on our country anyway. Thankfully, these heroes and their allies came together, and helped us show exactly what happens when our country is threatened by those who act against her interests. As my first act as Grand Princess and Empress, I sentence Pytherius to death for his crimes against our country. The hall erupted into cheers. The sound reverberated off the stone walls. For a fleeting moment the companions shared a glance. The weight of responsibility and the bond of camaraderie unspoken but deeply felt. Yet amidst the celebration the shadow of what lay ahead loomed large, for though the battle was won, the spectre of Pytherius still threatened their fragile victory. Secondly, I must make an announcement, and give further thanks to Aurelius and his party. During their sojourn in the Eternal City, they discovered more than the Mantle of Kings. They uncovered a truth that had been hidden from me for 20 years. My brother, presumed dead, was found. Not dead at all. His soul instead had been hidden by a sinister cabal calling itself the Immaculate Circle, an organization that has supported Pytherius' bid for the crown. It seems the planning of their coup of Taldor goes back a lot longer than the Exaltation Day massacre. Thanks to the efforts of these brave heroes, I have for the first time in 20 years laid eyes upon my brother. It is with great pleasure that I announce to all of you gathered here that he is with us today. Please, everyone, give a warm welcome to my brother, Prince Carius Stavian. This time, instead of cheering, the hall emitted a collective gasp as Carius walked awkwardly in and waved at the crowd. Eutropia walked over, and as a single tear went down her cheek, she kissed him on the forehead. "My brother," she said. Carius turned to the crowd and said, "I can also verify that everything she has said is true. I was there with Taldaris in the Eternal City. I saw him make Baron Aurelius the custodian of the Mantle of Kings. As Grand Prince Stavian III's only male heir, I'd also like to affirm my position as well. The primogeniture reform was confirmed by the Senate before the massacre, and my sister, Grand Princess Eutropia Stavian, first of her name, is our rightful sovereign, both by law as well as by divine proclamation." And he kneeled before her and kissed her hand. "And I promise to serve her in any way she'll let me." This time the crowd once again erupted into applause and cheering. This was no longer just the crowning of a new Grand Prince. This had become a story worthy of the legends of old Taldor. As the applause began to die down, Marius sat on the final seat beside the heroes that had been left empty. He was sat next to Diyanah. "She's a really good speaker, isn't she?" he whispered quietly to the monk. "Quit trying to make me like you, kid," he snapped back, but there was an air of humor in his voice. "Just pay attention like the rest of us." Marius folded his arms on his lap and looked back to Eutropia as she continued. "Now I have many more matters to get to," she said, "so I will try to move as quickly through all of them. I'm sure there will be many more discussions to be had in the coming days and weeks, but let us start with the big ones. First, there were many lords and ladies of this land who supported Pytherius in his bid for the crown. I know that many did so because they believed him the legitimate heir, because of the misinformation spread by his camp. Others were co-conspirators in his plots. The decisions about what to do with the lords and ladies who supported him will be determined on a case-by-case basis. Certainly I will brook no ill will to those who chose to stay out of the conflict entirely." And she looked to Grand Duke Hescalar as she said this, and he gave her back a nod as if to thank her. She continued, "Let us look at one example here before us, so that we might set a precedent for these cases in the future." Then soldiers brought before the assemblage the chained form of the deposed Count Bartleby and Sir Gul Guizarn. "Bartleby Lothide was the Count of Marat County once," explained Eutropia. "After a vote of no confidence had him deposed and replaced by Count O'Cara, another one of the heroes of our recent battle." She indicated the Count in the assemblage. Marius could also see that somehow Sally O'Cara had managed to get to Maheto as well, and O'Cara had a hand firmly on his daughter's shoulder. "Count Lothide was kept confined to O'Cara's keep in Pensaris, until his ally Sir Gul Guizarn broke him out. They joined with Pytherius' forces, galvanizing imperialist sentiment across the mid-country. Count Lothide, have you anything to say in your defense?" Count Lothide swallowed grimly. "Only that I had no notion of the Mantle of Kings, that Taldor has never had a woman for an emperor or grand prince, and I found the story about the primogeniture vote hard to believe, and that my instincts were that Pytherius would make for a strong ruler. I'm sorry if I chose poorly, but I chose with my heart. I now see the error in my ways. I accept whatever punishment you propose." Grand Princess Eutropia paused slightly. Those that knew the situation well could see that she was taken aback by his level of contrition. "Have any gathered here anything to say in defense or in condemnation of Count Lothide's actions?" she asked, and she looked to O'Cara. O'Cara, being the sort of man that liked to think before he spoke, considered his words thoughtfully, but he was of course interrupted by another voice, that of Martella Lothide. "Grand Princess, if I may, Bartleby is my brother. I don't know what the appropriate punishment should be for his actions, but I do know that a civil war is a terrible thing. It pits family members against each other, and our noble lines are so intermingled that if we were to execute every traitor to the crown, we would only leave hundreds of lords and ladies across Taldor with a terrible resentment in their heart. In light of that fact, I would request clemency for my brother, and hope that this could be a precedent for other similar situations elsewhere." Another voice spoke up then. It was Lucrezia Marthane. "I wish to offer a different perspective. Count Bartleby Lothide's crimes were greater than supporting Pytherius. I would remind you that he was deposed by a unanimous vote of no confidence before he joined the Grand Strategos. Under his watch, a Darklands breach almost consumed the town of Jambis, werewolves were allowed to threaten its northern woodlands, and any city beyond Lothidar itself was allowed to languish under his rule. He routinely made sport of his people, humiliating them for his own amusement. He is not fit to keep lands and titles in Taldor. You have spoken of being a reformer. If that is true, I would hold you to it. It should not be the people that serve the lords, it should be the lords that have a responsibility to the people. Bartleby Lothide should be condemned for more than his betrayal of the crown." Eutropia looked to Lucrezia, and then back to her friend Martella. She also risked a glance to Count O'Cara, but he was quiet, observing Eutropia as if waiting to see how she would adjudicate this, which seemed like the first challenging decision she would ever have to make as ruler. "I think you both speak truly and from the heart. Martella, I agree that death is the wrong judgment here. Lucrezia, I believe that leaders should serve their people, and the man as you describe him should not be fit for titles in Taldor. So it is with heavy heart that I pass my judgment." She turned to Bartleby, who took in a sharp lungful of air, fearing what she might say. Bartleby Lothede, your sentence is exile. I strip you of titles. Your lands have already been passed to Count O'Kera, but you may keep your hereditary moneys not tied to the land or holdings therein. Those you may take with you into exile. I know that Martella here will help you get situated, in either Andoran or Absalom. Both are close by, and in both places a man of your means may make something of themselves. You will still be able to see your family, though only when they come to you, as you will never again be allowed to set foot in Taldor, under pain of death. Bartleby winced as the sentence was delivered, although ultimately it could have been much more severe. Martella's eyes showed nothing as she sat down. Neither did Lucrezia's, although Marius knew that she would not be fully satisfied with this, but she was tactful enough not to cause a scene. Then Marius found himself standing up on his feet as well. Grand Princess, this is a fair judgment for Bartleby Lothede. Not so, I fear, for Sir Ghoul. Sir Ghoul's only crime, as I see it, is in his enduring loyalty, in this case to a lord that led him astray. The governance of Lothedar was among the best in the land, and this was a credit to Sir Ghoul. If Sir Ghoul would pledge himself to the service of Count O'Kera, rather than to the deposed Count Lothede, I believe a full pardon would be appropriate here. Eutropia turned to the disgraced knight and said to him, What do you say to that, Sir Ghoul? Tears now stung at Sir Ghoul's eyes, and he turned to Bartleby. Forgive me, my old friend, he said to the Count, and then he turned to Eutropia. Yes, like Bartleby, I had no notion of the Mantle of Kings, or that such a thing might exist. It's clear now that we chose wrongly, and that I continue to choose wrongly, even as events in my life tried to open my eyes. He turned to Marius, and Marius could see that Sir Ghoul was bitterly thinking of their duel, and that Abadar himself had likely been watching. I'm grateful for Marius's words today, and if O'Kera will take me, I pledge my life, my loyalty, and my sword to Count O'Kera of Marat County, to serve him in any way he'll let me. And you, Count O'Kera, would you accept Sir Ghoul into your service? Count Nicholas O'Kera nodded solemnly. I would. Eutropia smiled. Then let my third act as Grand Princess be one of clemency. Sir Ghoul, your crimes are forgiven. Your bonds will be broken, and you will be remanded to the care of Count O'Kera. Bartleby Lothede, you will remain in chains until we have successfully delivered you to a place of exile of your choosing. Bartleby said nothing, he only looked to the floor. He was dragged back to whatever dungeon he had been drawn from. The guards quickly unchained Sir Ghoul, who bowed his head and approached Selly and Nikolaus. Marius could vaguely see Selly chiding Sir Ghoul and telling him to shape up, which he couldn't help but smirk at. Now I would speak to all our friends that came together to win the day yesterday. First, my great thanks for the support of Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan, Grand Duchess Malia Denzani, Grand Duchess Beatriza Fulspar, and the Duchess Helenara Lorsus. Your musterings made this victory possible. I would also like to extend a very special thank you to Grand Duke Broyce Renjana. Grand Duke Broyce was the only one among us to suffer grave consequences for supporting my claim. His lands have been taken from him. Broyce's willingness to retreat from the Avon prefecture altogether, while the rest of us mustered our forces, is a credit to his patience and diligence. Lord Broyce, you have my assurances that our next acts here will be to march our army northwards and reclaim your lands. Additionally, I will be increasing the reserve of both the Taldan horse and phalanx that are pledged to your lands in a show of thanks for your critical support in these last few weeks. Thank you. Grand Duke Broyce Renjana simply bowed before her and said, It has been my honour to help you win this day. Then let me address our allies from further afield. First, let me thank our dwarven allies. Brogny Ironpick, clan liege of the Ironpicks, brought with him a significant company of dwarves from the dwarven sky citadel of Crevenkis. His cannon scored a killing blow against one of Pytherius' dragons early in the battle, a critical early shift in the conflict. Words of thanks are simply not enough to repay this debt. Is there anything you would ask of us in return? Aye, said the dwarf, stepping forward. Firstly, I'd like to offer some thanks of my own. Our support came because Aurelius and his party gave the Ironpick clan exclusive mining rights to the Jambis mines when the Darklands breach in Marat was discovered. Those mines run deep, and their veins of silver will keep my people well fed and provisioned for a long time. We fought as much to protect what we were given as we did to support your claim. Then he paused, worried he had said the wrong thing. No offence intended, your majesty, he added. Eutropia offered the brusque dwarf a smile and said, "None taken." "Right, so in fact I do have a request, but not from you, or perhaps not from you directly. Actually, my request is for the Lady Grella of the Dwarf Hold of Tagaret." Brogni turned to Grand Duke Borand Heskelar's famously dwarven wife. Lady Grella was slightly surprised at being addressed. "You are one of the high ladies of Tagaret, a mighty hold in the Five Kings Mountains. You are the wife of one of Taldor's mighty Grand Dukes, one who stood aside when the war for the crown was being fought on his soil. Yet the dwarves of Kravenkis did send aid, even as we are besieged by enemies from below. There's not much I could ask of the Grand Princess Eutropia that she could provide. What my people need are dwarven allies. We need help clearing the Darklands tunnels beneath Kravenkis. So my ask is of you, travel to Tagaret, travel to Highhelm, or offer me envoys with the right to speak on your behalf. I represent one of the oldest sky citadels of the ancient empire of Tar-Kaderm. Kravenkis needs help, and it needs help from those that can navigate the deep tunnels. Will you help me?" Lady Grella turned to her husband, but he gave her an expression as if to indicate that this was her business. She cleared her throat and addressed the Kravenkis dwarf. "You are right, Brogni, of Clan Ironpick. Almost half of Maheto is dwarven. Taldor's ties with Kravenkis are deep, but the help you need won't come from the Grand Princess. I will travel to Highhelm. I'll seek aid from the dwarves of the Five Kings Mountains, and if they won't pledge their aid, I'll travel further still, to Kragadan and to Yanderhof, and beseech the dwarves of the Mindspin Mountains. This I promise you." Brogni smiled broadly, and a twinkling tear seemed to glint in his eye. "Thank you, Lady Grella, and thank you, Grand Princess," he said. "That's all I have to say." As the dwarf stepped back into the crowd, Eutropia's gaze swept the assembled crowd, settling on a figure near the edge of the dais. Clad in robes of deep green and brown, adorned with intricate embroidery of leaves and vines, stood High Druid Valenar the Green. Standing proudly beside him in the traditional green robes of the Wildwood Lodge, her normally tangled, straw-coloured hair washed for this occasion, stood Anlel Oakleaf, who had fought alongside the Wildwood's treants and helped turn the tide of the battle. "Now to our close allies of the Verduran," Eutropia began, her voice softer now, though no less commanding. "Let me offer our gratitude to those who fought not only out of duty to Taldor, but perhaps out of an even higher calling, to protect the balance of nature itself." The crowd murmured in acknowledgement as she gestured towards Valenar. "High Druid Valenar the Green, you and your kin answered our call in our hour of greatest need. Your druid stood shoulder to shoulder with our soldiers. Your magic turned the tides of the battle, and your precious war lions took down 2 of Pytherius' drakes at a great cost to their own number. Without your aid, this victory might not have been ours. Their great sacrifice is not lost on me." Valenar inclined his head, his emerald eyes meeting Eutropia's. He seemed to possess an almost supernatural calm. "Grand Princess, the Wildwood Lodge serves the balance of all things. Pytherius' ambition threatened that balance, as did the pain of this war upon the land. We came not for crown or glory, but to ensure the forest endures, the rivers run clean, and the skies remain untainted. But we did not come unbidden. In your hour of need, Demetria, proxy to Grand Duchess Fulspar, came to our island. She promised us your aid in reducing Endoran logging. A firmer hand with Andoran will go a long way to protecting our wilderness." "A promise I shall not break. I do not govern Andoran, but you have my commitment that as soon as we have dealt with Pytherius and calmed our own troubled lands, I will undertake a diplomatic mission there, and speak with Supreme-elect Andira Murasek. I also promise to attend next year's Greenwood Gala. It is the halfway mark between the decennial re-signing of our centuries-long accord, the Wildwood Treaty. On the decennial event in 4724, I plan to be there personally to sign the treaty again with you. Your wisdom, and indeed all of your druids, will always have a place in Taldor's halls and hearts, High Druid." Noise washed over the hall once more, this time not in cheers but in a respectful chorus of claps and bows. Valenar gave her an appreciative nod as he stepped back into the crowd. Eutropia turned next to a figure of striking elegance and ethereal grace. Captain Dindaniel, of the Elves of Keonin, stood tall and proud, his silvered armour glinting faintly even in the soft torchlight of the great hall, his long golden hair falling like a waterfall over his shoulders, framing a face as sharp and serene as a crescent moon. The aid of the elves of Keonin and the great owls of the House of Sky came as a great surprise to me, but a very welcome one. Captain Diyanah, you may tell Queen Edasseril that I owe her a great debt, one that I shall endeavour to repay in any way that I can." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathered lords and captains. Many of them had been in awe during the battle as the great owls of the House of Sky soared across the fields of Maheto, their riders raining down a stream of carefully aimed arrows upon Pythiris's forces. Diyanah inclined his head, his expression cool yet dignified. "Grand Princess, though you have not met her yet, Queen Talandia Dasseril, High Lady of Keonin, and Sovereign of the Iudine Elves of Galarian, believes in you she may find a kindred spirit, one who wishes to see a great age of peace and prosperity between humans and elves, as the Iudine and the Aslanti once shared long ago. As you have committed to journey to Andoran to meet with their supreme elect, so too does Queen Edasseril invite you to see the City of Mists in Keonin, and meet with her in the Silver Citadel." Eutropia bowed her head. It suddenly became quite clear to Martella, Aurelius, and the rest of the company that with this invitation from a centuries-old monarch who had ruled her realm far longer than any of them had been alive, that Eutropia was suddenly feeling the great weight of responsibility. Even kings and queens could be humbled. "Of course," said Eutropia after a moment, "I will make it a matter of highest priority." "There is another matter as well," said Diyanah. "We also did not come unbidden. We were called to war by an elf among your company, an elf that Queen Talandia wishes to meet most urgently, an elf who hides his face because his kind have been vilified through the actions of some among their number. Even now he is here in the hall with us. The Queen would see that he share his true face in Taldor, for all to see and for all to know him." Rankle suddenly sucked in a deep breath, panicking slightly. This was not a turn of events he had expected at all. "I know of whom you speak," said Eutropia quickly, "but it is not my place to share his secret." Aurelius's valet, Willem, coughed slightly and stood up. "It's me," he said. Eutropia looked at him coolly and waved a hand. "Then stand, and be recognized for who you are." Willem trepidatiously stepped forward, magically shedding his disguise as Aurelius's valet. "My name is Rankle, of the lost Aindalar house of Vythriel. My kinsfolk descended into the Darklands long ago, but we never turned to demon worship as did the fallen houses of Zirnakainen. We have learned to hide in plain sight, to hide our faces. For many months now I have faithfully served Baron Aurelius as his valet Willem, but the face I wore was a false one. I am a cave elf, but I serve no demon." A number of gasps could be heard across the assemblage. Eutropia raised her hand once more, calling for silence. "Your heritage was known to me before this moment. You have been a friend to my close ally and confidant Martella Lothide for many years before this. You have always served the interests of Taldor, your adopted home, and I count you, Rankle, among the great heroes of our country. Soon all of Taldor will as well." After a pause there was a chorus of claps, and Rankle felt strangely pleased with himself. "Thank you very much," said Captain Diyanah. "Now I have one final request. My company and I are flying back tonight after this audience is concluded. Rankle must fly back with us to meet with Queen Edasseril. She greatly desires to understand the nature of the lost houses, how many there are, and how to make contact with them. Rankle will be our guide into that world." Eutropia looked back at the captain and told him simply that it was not her place to command him, but Rankle turned to the captain as well, and agreed to fly back with him as soon as he'd had a chance to say his goodbyes to his close friends and allies. Then the captain placed a hand upon his heart, bowed low, and stepped back into the crowd. I save for last, I think, our most unlikely allies in this battle. Grand Princess Eutropia turned to face a towering figure draped in furs and armor hammered from raw iron, who stood out like a sore thumb amid the Taldan finery. War Chief Orgloom the Bloody-Handed, his massive frame casting an imposing shadow, stared back at her with burning amber eyes, his great tusks reflecting the flickering torchlight, his arms crossed defiantly across his chest. The hall fell silent, the tension palpable as nobles and soldiers alike held their breath, watching their princess address a leader from a people so long ostracized by Taldor. "War Chief Orgloom," Eutropia began, her tone measured and sincere, "I will not deny our shared history, nor will I pretend that my people have not wronged yours. The orcs of the White Marches have been driven to the edges of our land, to wild hill country, not favoured by humans. When Grand Strategos Frascati and Honourable Marius came to me with words of your soldiers joining our army, I confess I did not understand why you would march to support me. But now, standing here in the aftermath of victory, I know that without your strength, your warriors, and your unyielding resolve, this battle might not have been won. For this I am profoundly grateful. Orgloom stepped forward. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble as his heavy boots struck the floor. His voice, guttural yet articulate, carried through the hall like rolling thunder.
We came here not for you, Princess, but for vengeance, to crush Pytherius and his ilk beneath our boots, as they sought to do to us. Yet there is more. You have named this Dromar, this half-orc, as you might say, Marius, to be one of your champions. He promised to beseech you to rebuild what was lost. This was finally why I came.
All eyes turned to Marius. The half-orc Tavernkeep stood up. His posture was formal, poised even, orc by blood, but fully Taldan by demeanor. His expression was set with determination, but his heart was in turmoil, for in truth he worried he had overpromised to the warchief.
It's true. I made that promise, because I believe that Taldor cannot prosper while its debts remain unpaid. Pytherius might be our enemy, but his actions are our actions. His injustices, our injustices. We destroyed Drushvuk as surely as he did. All the peoples of our world deserve dignity and a place to call home. I know, my princess, that there will be much rebuilding to be done at home. It is my fervent hope that the crown can spend some coin to help rebuild what the orcs have lost, and in so doing, perhaps mend some of the scars that exist between our people.
Eutropia's facade broke a little, as it was clear Marius had put her on the spot slightly. The loyalist faction had rallied behind her for her reputation as a reformer that might push Taldor forward, but using Taldan money to rebuild an orc city was likely a commitment too far for the more centrist members of her coalition, especially for those like Grand Duke Roycer and Diyanah, who would have had been more politically aligned with the imperialist faction, were it not for Pytherius' own many failings as a leader. Marius risked one more comment while she deliberated.
You are Grand Princess and Empress now. I can see you being pulled in so many directions tonight. I ask only that you try to follow your heart on this, and others will come to know you as we have come to know you, as someone fair and just, who sees how Taldor is changing and is open to embracing that change.
Eutropia sighed deeply. You will have my help, Warchief Orgloom. I cannot promise here and now in what form that aid will come, be it supplies or monies or engineers, but we will figure it out. Warchief Orgloom, may I also add that Taldor has erred in its treatment of your people, and I cannot undo the past, but I can promise you this, we will help you rebuild, and I will ensure that the communities of half-orc travellers in the White Marches that move between your lands and ours, from which Marius himself once hailed, will be treated with dignity and respect. Those who wish to emigrate into the Taldan cities will be welcomed as our own people. On this you have my word as Grand Princess. The hall erupted into a mixture of murmurs, but also of applause. Orgloom's eyes narrowed as he studied Eutropia, but after a moment he gave a single sharp nod.
Words will not rebuild walls, nor bring back the dead. But it is a start.
His voice was gruff, but not without a note of hope. Warchief Orgloom put a great big hand on the shoulder of a younger half-orc behind him and thrust him into the limelight.
This is Bogue Hellbent, cousin to Marius, and like Marius he was a sight to behold on the battlefield, fearless, cunning, unflinching. His human half lends him more patience with Taldan ways. I name him Warchief Hellbent of Drushvuk. He will carry forward the burden of rebuilding.
Bogue looked shocked at this, but the few Dromar warriors that had been permitted into the hall cheered when Orgloom made this announcement. Orgloom silenced them with a wave of his hand, though, and he turned to Eutropia.
So, I have one final request of the Empress. I am old, and before I die I wish to lay eyes on the orc hold of Belkzen, greatest land of the orcs. I wish for passage on a Taldan ship to take me up the Sellen, across the Incarthan Lake, and then for a safe escort across the lands of the dread knights of Lastwall, so I may lay eyes upon Urgir before I die."
"This last boon I can surely grant," said Eutropia, "and War Chief Hellbent, I look forward to working with you in the near future." Bogue bowed deeply at the Grand Princess. The tension in the hall eased as Orgloom returned to his seat, and Marius exhaled slowly, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Eutropia turned back to her audience, her voice carrying the weight of her promise. "Marius, don't sit yet," she said before Marius could take a seat. "Before this council is adjourned, there is one final remaining matter, Marius, and that is you." The room grew quiet as Eutropia gestured for him to approach. Marius, his movements measured, crossed the floor to stand before her. In his fine purple vest and his carefully groomed moustache and hair, he looked the very image of Taldan finery, save, of course, for the short tusks in his jaw and the green of his skin. Eutropia stepped down from her dais, meeting him as an equal. "Marius," she began, her voice carrying both warmth and steel, "you have served this cause with unwavering loyalty, courage, and honor. You have fought not only for me, but for all those who could not fight for themselves. You have stood as a bridge between our people who were once divided, and have shown us what strength and unity can truly mean. I mean this sincerely when I say that I believe you have changed all those you have encountered for the better, me included." The gathered lords and captains, many of whom had watched Marius in battle, leaned forward in their seats. Aurelius, Demi, and Diyanah all smiled a quiet, approving smile. "For those that do not know, Marius helped keep us safe during the Exaltation Day massacre. He helped rescue Duchess Martella Lothide from cults of Norgorba in the wake of the massacre. In Marat County, he slew a manticore and a wyvern. He eliminated a den of werewolves and a dark elf infiltration. He helped slay the Sakhils of Yanmas and exposed Pythierius' plot in the Avon prefecture. He travelled to the Eternal City, and upon discovering that our own first Emperor Taldaris was being bound by the Herald of Norgorba, he showed no fear as he plunged headlong into combat with the Reaper's right hand. He brokered the alliance with Orgloom's people, as we have just seen, and he led the cavalry charge against Pythierius' lieutenant Mylan Jereth, and after breaking his soldiers, engaged in combat with Pythierius himself before the traitor used magic to escape." It was such a long and impressive list of deeds that she rattled off that she had to draw in a sharp intake of breath before she could continue. She drew from behind the dais an ornate sword, its hilt gilded, its blade gleaming. She lifted it with reverence and held it before her. "It is long past time that your deeds are recognized, not just in word, but in title and station." Marius's head inclined slightly, his face unable to contain the raw emotions coursing through him. Eutropia stepped closer, lifting the blade. "Kneel." He lowered himself to one knee, and Eutropia raised the sword. Its tip hovered above his shoulder. "Before I proceed, Marius," she said, "the lords of Taldor have house names. Have you a family name I can use?" "The Dromar traveler communities do not have family names," he noted. "I have always just been Marius, or Marius of the White Marches, or Marius, son of Akrod." "Some have taken their profession for their name," she observed. "Marius Tavernkeep is a poor name, I think." "And your human side, they did not have names?" "My people were mostly half-orcs. I have a human grandmother on my mother's side that I'm aware of, but I know little of her." "And on the orc side, nothing there either?" "I have a full orc grandfather, too. He was of the Severed Spine tribe. Not a fitting name, either, I'd imagine." Eutropia mulled on this for only a moment. "It could be. I name you Marius of the House of Severus." A tear formed in the corner of Marius's eyes. It was a great name that spoke to all the pieces of him. He couldn't speak, so he just nodded and kneeled his head down. "In the name of the Primogen Crown, the Lion Throne, and the people of Taldor," she intoned, "I dub thee Sir Marius Severus, Knight of Taldor, protector of her people and champion of her lands." She tapped the flat of the blade lightly on each of his shoulders. "Rise, Sir Marius, and let all here bear witness to your knighthood." Marius rose, and for a moment the hall was silent as he met Eutropia's gaze. Then applause began to roll over the crowd, starting as a hesitant ripple before swelling into a great wave of approval. Diyanah cheered loudly, his voice carrying over the din, while Aurelius and Demi offered a slow, deliberate clap. Eutropia stepped back, allowing Marius to turn and face the assembly.
He wiped the tear from his eye. He turned to the crowd.
Tonight, we share drinks once more with friends. Tomorrow, the hunt for Pytherius begins.
End of chapter.
Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Thank you so much for watching. You have just watched the season finale of Season 5. This is a pretty straightforward episode. It's basically Eutropia giving a big victory speech. But in the course of that victory speech, we get so many cool little fun character moments. Too many to name, really. We get to hear about what ultimately will happen to Sir Gul Guizarn and Bartleby Lothede. So there's finally some closure to some of that Season 2 stuff that had been lingering in the background. We also finally get a knighthood for Marius. I think people will be hopefully excited to see that finally play out. And of course, Marius advocates on behalf of the orcs of Drushvuk, and the Grand Princess commits to rebuilding that city, or at least helping with the rebuilding. It's a bit vague. And similarly, Demi advocates for the Druids, and Grand Princess Eutropia will similarly be advocating for the Verduran Forest in terms of like the way that she deals with Andoran. The nice thing about all this stuff is this is all stuff that I think I can imagine if we ever run Wardens of Wildwood, or if we run other adventures in and around this area, the decisions that are made here in this moment will affect the outcome of all those future adventures. And I would adapt those future adventures, if I ran it with this group, to incorporate some of the effects of the choices that the heroes had Eutropia make here. Anyway, I'm not going to run through every single thing that happened in the course of this speech, but it really was a closure episode and a fun one. This was one where it was mostly at the game table me lecturing at the players, but there were moments here and there where they got to jump in and advocate for someone or make some suggestions. And all of this is slowly shaping Princess Eutropia. So when we get to our grand finale and we sort of articulate what happens in the future of Taldor, it's all informed by how the players are behaving and acting, and Eutropia is learning as much from them as they are listening to her. That's all I got for you. Very soon, Season 6, the final season of War for the Crown, will be coming at you. I hope to see you then.